Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branding Bud Live, the live stream that's 100% THC, 0% WTF. Every week, we bring business people to talk about the business of cannabis. I'm David Paleschuck, the founder of Branding Bud Consulting Group and the author of Branding Bud, the Commercialization of Cannabis, the first book on cannabis branding. And I'm here with my BCF, best cannabis friend, Adriana Hemans, a marketing executive with 100 years in the cannabis industry.
100 years? Wow, you're gonna make me sound so old, David.
Oh, I thought it was more experienced than old.
Well, if you add it all up, I do work extra hard, so it should count up to 100 years of experience. Just kidding.
You and working in the cannabis industry, as we all know, is like dog years. So you might already be there.
That's what they say. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for that intro, David. And part of the reason why is because, number one, we're talking about my favorite topic today, which is cannabis beverages. We're also talking about alcohol beverages and beer, and we're talking about regionality and branding. So, we love to talk to the audience. We love to hear where you guys are from. We love to hear what you're up to. But I also was hoping maybe you could settle a little bet for me. This is something that my husband and I were discussing yesterday, and there's a beverage, an alcoholic beverage from Massachusetts with vodka and cranberry juice, and we couldn't decide if it was called a Cape Cod or a Cape Codder. So if you know the answer, Cape Cod or Cape Codder, please drop it in the chat because I'd really like to know.
Or in a Boston accent, which would be like a Cape Codder.
Yeah, please do.
Here you go. All right, somebody will know. And look, our favorite people are here already. Jordan from Marino PR and Aaron Sales from Mocha Humboldt. Hello from Humboldt. We were just talking about Humboldt and an upcoming wedding in Humboldt. So we're pretty excited about that.
Good to see you again, Cheryl. Hey, Caleb. Caleb's in the garden cultivating. And hi, Stacy from Denver. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, we've got a great show. And we love the community that we've built here and everybody participating. So thank you for that. Our show today is pretty cool, as you said earlier, Adriana. The title is The Socialization of Cannabis Beverages, and we're going to be speaking with Seng Robertson. She is the Technical Director of Cannabis Research and Development at the Boston Beer Company. And for those of you that don't know, the Boston Beer Company owns Samuel Adams and a number of other beer brands that you do know, and cider brands and hard cider brands and so on and so forth. So we're going to be chatting with her about a whole bunch of things relative to cannabis-infused beverages. And some of the things we'll be chatting about are what role have beverages played in shaping gender associations and societal expectations, and how will this translate into cannabis beverages? How have beverages traditionally been used to celebrate all sorts of things, and how will cannabis sort of be slotted into that? Is champagne the only thing that's used for festive occasions, or will cannabis beverages fit in there as well? And then finally, we'll talk about some cannabis beverages examples, and talk about where they are, where they're available, and some of the things that differentiate them.
Love it. I'm super excited. Also, I love that you use the word festivizations.
Did I? Oh, gee. Well, that said, I'm excited to speak with Seng.
Yeah, let's say hey. Hey, Seng, welcome.
Hello. Glad to be on here. Thank you, David. Thank you, Adriana.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to talk to you. Let's just jump in and tell us about yourself and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, talking about socialization, definitely soccer is my socialization. Love playing soccer. And even at this age, there's nothing better than having teammates cheer you on. So soccer would be one. Reading, passionate about reading. Currently reading The Creative Act of Being, A Way of Being, by Rick Rubin. So that's the book I'm reading now. And really learning new things. This week I took a pottery class for the first time. The last few years I've been growing a cannabis plant. I have a miniature plant that's starting to grow right here. So anybody in the audience, open for audience advice on how to grow better cannabis. It's there is a technique. So again, love learning new things and really trying to elevate my growing experience. So
I love that. I know we have at least 2 people in the audience who can give you some tips on growing cannabis. Probably more.
I was about to say we've got some superstars in terms of that. Yeah. So you never know.
It's definitely not easy.
I'm surprised about soccer. That's just not what I would have guessed. So it's always interesting to find new things about our guests that I would not have thought.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so you are the technical director of R&D at the Boston Beer Company for cannabis or cannabis beverages. How does one find that role? How does one find their way, into to being in such an interesting role?
Yeah, first I have to say, technical director, I get a lot of IT solicitation from LinkedIn. I'm the last person you want to ask for IT, but I can tell you, technical director. Um, Really, I started with many roles. I started with a quality role when I first graduated, and then I went into research and then product development and operations. So I really had that opportunity to really build this base with, different experiences and really a wide base of knowledge, which you really need to launch a good product, in terms of quality and researching. So I've been really fortunate to have that different experience and really enjoy mentoring teams. So that's how I became a technical director. I joined the industry in 2018, the cannabis industry, and ever since then fell in love with it and, had this great opportunity to join the Boston Beer Company, which is a great organization. And yeah, it's a great role to have. And, it's challenging being in this new space, but, I think having that diverse background has really helped. So that's what a technical director does, a little bit of everything, many hats.
Yeah, you obviously know a lot about beverages and cannabis, and since we're getting like really sort of specific into the nitty gritty, we'll talk a little bit about product development and branding. But maybe just to sort of level set for people who are listening in and might not be super familiar with the science, can you share with us a little bit about like what should people know just at a high level about the science of infused cannabis beverages?
Yeah, I think there's this misconception that it's like this really new product, but if you think about it, what we're really making is a beverage, and a great tasting beverage. So at the end of the day, it's similar to, say, an energy drink where people are infusing caffeine into a beverage. Cannabis is really, these cannabinoids are ingredients that we're infusing into a beverage. So first and foremost, you're developing a beverage and then you're infusing the cannabinoids. Where there is maybe a bit of nuance is these cannabinoids aren't water soluble. So you have to contend with somehow mixing a non water loving with the liquid. So there's different ways of doing that. But again, it's not new to the food industry. The food industry has dealt with emulsions. If you think about even something as simple as milk, you're, emulsifying fat globules into water. So, similar to milk, you have to find a way to get these non-water loving molecules into the beverage. So that's one thing that's a little bit different. And then the other thing is cannabinoids can react to oxygen, light, packaging, even the different ingredients. So you have to be really knowledgeable about making sure that, your beverage has the amount of cannabinoids that meets the label claim. So there's definitely science behind it, but it is a lot of product development. At the end of the day, you are making a beverage that needs to taste good. And really, when you're developing it, the sensory is so important, right? So if someone came to me and said, I developed a formulation in 3 tries, I'd be like, how good does that formulation taste? I can say we sometimes go over 50 to 100 iterations, little changes and nuances to kind of perfect that, beverage. So, but at a high level, there is a lot of science behind a cannabis beverage.
It seems to me, just in terms of the iterations, it seems to me over the course of time uh, that I've been in the industry and working with beverages, which is now, I guess, almost 12 years. Initially, you didn't have that homogenization. You had globs of cannabis oil sticking to the cap, in the bottle or to the bottom, or you had some sort of separation. And it seems I don't know, I want to say maybe the last 4 or 5 years, that's been sort of worked through. So it's just interesting to see I guess how beverages have been developed in a strange way, because initially they were like, for example, 420 quencher, or cannabis quencher rather, more of a juice, very sweet, and the sweetness was really often to offset the taste of cannabis. And now that we've worked through, with companies like Source and Vertosa, among others, that have sort of worked through the technology, and now we're at a place where um, people are adding terpenes or coming back to the cannabis flavor intentionally, rather than trying to hide it with different things. Has technology changed in the course of the last few years that has allowed the flavor profiles to change as well?
Absolutely. I think, anybody who's tasted a bad cannabis beverage, I hope you don't stay away from the category, because cannabis beverages can taste good. And I think exactly like what you said, David, like, you know, um, we didn't bring it, like, anyone who's developed it early on, maybe prior to legalization, maybe the science wasn't there. But now that we have the science to make a great tasting beverage, I think, we can bring people back to the category who might have tasted it once before and was like, this is sickeningly sweet. But, I think, it can be really, really good. And I think, it's pulling in, like I said, this experience from the CPG world where, emulsions aren't new to the food industry. So I think that's what's really important, that we continually improve the science.
It seems like a good fit, right, for a beer company like Boston Beer Company that has a long history of developing flavors that, consumers will crave and come back for. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy that went into the decision to like launch a cannabis infused beverage, and why this was a good fit for Boston Beer Company?
Yeah, I would say, Boston Beer Company knows beverages, right? They're really great at creating great brands that are iconic. When you think about like Truly or Dogfish or Sam Adams, Twisted Tea, Angry Orchard. So, a lot of great brands with a lot of great tasting beverages. I would say, you know, um, similar to what Michael Kaufman, who's been on your podcast previously, he said, it starts with a quality product. Without a quality product, you can only get so far. And I think that's part of the ethos of Boston Beer, like a quality product. We knew we could create a great cannabis product, and we knew we could be leaders in that category. So, I think it was a great fit. And, with Teapot, it's really, you know, the right pot with the right tea with the right time of day. And, having experience with Twisted Tea that's doing phenomenally well right now, I think it was just an easy transition to say, yes, we can do this and we can do this well.
And just to be specific, Twisted Tea versus Teapot, one's cannabis infused, one is not.
Exactly. One's an alcoholic product and one is not an alcoholic product. One is cannabis infused. Again, we're actually under a subsidiary of the Boston Beer Company. So we're fully only operational in Canada. That kind of separates us from the US market. We only operate in Canada, and we're a subsidiary of the Boston Beer Company. But again, we have the ability to tap into a great resource at Boston, and all the talented people there to help develop products.
And just for those that aren't familiar with this, just to put this in perspective, a lot of people have heard of Sam Adams, a lot of people have heard of Angry Orchard, that sort of thing. But sometimes they haven't heard of the Boston Beer Company. So this is as important as, for example, Pabst Blue Ribbon creating Pabst Labs and coming into the cannabis space. And there's other large beverage companies out there that are looking at the space and waiting for the right moment. But I have to say, I respect those companies that jumped in earlier and are really legitimizing and normalizing the space, and also the form factor too, of a cannabis infused beverage. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I really think an organization like Boston Beer really normalizes cannabis beverages, and I think that's really important.
Definitely. I want to call out a question from Michelle. Thanks, Michelle, for dropping your question in the chat. She says, will you ever make beverages for the medical side, higher milligram and full spectrum?
Yeah, we're always in the works of developing new products. I can say Teapot is available in Canada through a medical channel, but it is not a higher milligram. We're always in the works with developing new beverage, and we currently are developing, different formulations in potentially higher milligrams and full spectrum. So stay tuned.
Michelle, thank you for that question. And so this begs the next question, which is, here we are talking to you, the technical director of R&D for the Boston Beer Company. You work in the alcohol industry, in the brewing industry and beverage industry. But here we just got a question about the medical side, somebody asking for full spectrum and higher dosage. How does that sort of come into play when we talk about the benefits of cannabis-infused beverages and how they'll play a role in society? Here on one level, we're talking about adult use recreational in the same way that the other beverages that Boston Beer creates, and now here's a question relative to medical. How does that sort of land in your world?
Yeah, I think for medical side, traditionally there's been a lot of flower in the medical side, but I think there is a subset of people who don't want to inhale, and I think having different form factors like beverages, makes sense on the medical side. I think it's just sometimes again making a higher dose taste good does take time. And definitely, the different channels, it can be challenging. But I think, definitely the medical side, and this is why you can buy Teapot through the medical side, even though it's not high dose for those low dose. I think it's very important to have these different form factors for the medical patients.
Yeah, something for everyone out there. Which leads me to let's jump into an audience participation. I feel like people are warmed up. Our chat is pretty active now, and since we're on the topic of talking about different types of consumers and what they want, and maybe like what the overlap is between these two different needs and desires, this is the question, the first audience participation question for today. In Q1 of this year, consumers of which beverage type were most likely to also be flower consumers, cannabis flower? A, beer drinkers, B, coffee drinkers, C, wine drinkers, or D, tea drinkers? And I should say that this stat comes from our friends over at Brightfield, and this is part of their Evergy CPG platform. Super helpful and interesting.
And this is interesting to me. I mean, obviously, hops and cannabis are very connected in many ways, but coffee drinkers and cannabis consumers are too. I'm very curious to see what the answer is. Audience, feel free to chime in.
We have one guess for D from Michelle. Aaron is throwing in a guess for B, coffee drinkers. Keep them coming. Let's see.
That's right. Sang, what do you think?
Well, I think the occasion, cannabis occasions seem to really mirror the alcohol occasion, like beer and wine. I work with a lot of colleagues who are beer drinkers, and I know they're also cannabis users. So to me, I kind of lean towards that way from experience in seeing what's going on around me. But I think, yeah, all these drinkers could be cannabis drinkers or also flower consumers.
I'm seeing a lot of guesses for B in here. Aileen guessed for beer drinkers. Quentin guessed D, tea drinkers. I see Daniel guessed for B, coffee drinkers. Cheryl's weighing in on coffee and beer. Cheryl's double dipping here. There we go.
For sure. I definitely think there's a connection between coffee, the consumption of coffee and consumption of cannabis. But I know on the plant level, hops and cannabis are related. So I'm either going for A or B. That's my answer. What do you think, Adriana?
I think let's reveal the answer because these are all excellent guesses.
Beans and greens, says Stacy.
I love that. Beans and greens. Hey, Stacy, how are you? B and D. All right, let's see what it is. Drum roll, please.
Drum roll, here it comes.
And it's beer drinkers.
Beer drinkers.
Yeah, I mean, this is very close. It seems to sort of like scale between 12% and 17%. And again, this is just from Q1. Brightfield does collect data quarterly from a sample size of 5,000 consumers across the US and across Canada too. It was interesting to see how closely related these are, and that beer is the number one. They're people that are also consuming, most likely to also consume cannabis flower. And Eileen got it right. Congrats.
Yeah. And when I read this, one of the things I was thinking was I would love to flip this question around to be of those that consume flower, what percentage also consumed coffee? Because that seems to me, to be sort of an intersection of things that people always sort of connect. Beans and greens as they just laid it out. I've never heard that expression, but I like it. Seng, how have beverages traditionally been used to celebrate occasions, and how can cannabis beverages, continue this tradition or differentiate this tradition? And by that I mean, champagne, is a drink that is often had on specific occasions, or different drinks, call out different genders or different occasions. How does cannabis fit into this, or how will it?
Yeah, I think it can definitely fit into celebrating occasions. I think beverages in general are, really an important part of celebrations. They kind of create this memory association. I can say, even like celebrating a milestone birthday in Banff, I can vividly remember the cocktail I drank. It was like a watermelon rosemary cocktail, and it just is part of a great memory association with celebrations. And I think cannabis can really be part of that. And the reason being is, out of all the form factors for cannabis, there was an Ipsos, study, and it showed that cannabis beverages was 4 times more likely to be consumed in a group environment of 5 or more versus like a vape or an edible. So I think that really points to like the social aspect and the celebratory. You're celebrating with friends or family. It can be any beverage really, and cannabis can really play into that. To me, I think it works really well with celebrations. When you're cheersing with friends and family, and like you said, it could be champagne, it could be celebrating at a sporting event with a beer. Like beverages are just experiences to help elevate that celebration.
That's so true, and it's so sort of ingrained in what we come to expect as human beings interacting with each other. And like the example you just gave of the sporting event and toasting with a beer, that's like so much a part of how we envision ourselves like in that moment. So it's really exciting to see this category expand, and I think that there will start to become like some cultural norms that are associated with cannabis beverages and certain events, or to your point, David, some celebrations. Because we're on the topic of culture, and this is something that we wanted to broach a little bit, is gender, right? So there's almost sort of like, we talk about this in branding a lot. There maybe is a gender-based brand or even a gender-based campaign, even though we're sort of living in a post-gender culture now, but there's still a little thread of that, I think, still being woven in. Can you speak to that a little bit, Seng? Because I'm really curious if you feel like cannabis beverages may be influencing our perceptions of gender and culture and the drinking and consuming cannabis.
Yeah, I think it reminds me of this commercial that I saw one time where like, a couple orders a cocktail and a beer, and the server brings it and automatically brings the beer to the male and the cocktail to the female. And it was kind of and the customers, they switched because it was really the female that ordered the beer. And I can say, being like this Asian female, when I order beer, people be like, I didn't expect you to order a beer, but sometimes I do prefer beer over a cocktail. So I think there is already stereotypes historically in alcohol, whereas in cannabis, a new category, I think anyone involved in marketing or, developing a brand, we do have, a responsibility that it's very inclusive. It doesn't need to be one gender or another. And we have this opportunity with this new category to be, to define it. So to me, I'm very excited about it. And again, like even looking at Teapot, when you look at the brand, it doesn't really sway somebody to say it's a female or a male brand or, a specific, it's very inclusive. And I think a lot of the cannabis brands that have come out are very inclusive. I can't say I look at one and think, oh, male, female, or, an older demographic or a younger demographic. And this really gets me excited about this category because we can do away with all those stereotypes, right? So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity.
What's so interesting to me, as we talk about this, I guess not too long ago, a couple of years ago, can was just can. But I want to say 2 years ago, um, during Gay Pride Month, the two owners came out and said they were gay. Their ads all of a sudden took a right turn and really showed um, LGBTQ uh, forward ads, and they really harnessed a community that was there. And so it's interesting. Like on one hand, we talk about old-fashioned stereotypes, of male and female, and the beer versus the cocktail. Um, but it's interesting to sort of see uh, how this shared experience, this community experience, is sort of really what's happening right now, especially in the cannabis space. Where there are brands for these specific communities, or to cater to these communities, or at the very least to be inclusive of these communities. And I think that's really interesting, and certainly a trend in the general world, but almost like a hyper trend in the cannabis space. So I think it's really a reaction to the outside world too. But have you seen any other brands that seem to be hyper focused on a community as such?
Yeah, I wouldn't say in Canada I've seen that. I think one of the issues here in Canada is advertisement. You can't really advertise to a certain demographic because advertisement is almost non-existent in the cannabis industry. We're very regulated with advertising. So it's hard to advertise to a community, even in the way that it's regulated. So I think that is one of the challenges. But again, I haven't really seen that in Canada. I feel like, it's been very, all brands are very open and, not really like kind of catering to a certain community, but just being very open.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're right. You're in Canada, which is something to be noted. For example,
Yeah.
the CAN campaign had billboards on Sunset Boulevard
Yeah.
in LA. So just
Oh,
absolutely very different rules and regulations
environment.
surrounding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to just call out a side conversation that I see going on in the chat, which I think is so interesting. Stacy asked, off topic, but is liquid death more popular amongst men? And there's a little back and forth about what liquid death is. This has actually come up on Branding Bud Live a couple times before, and we were joking around that like water is now edgy and cannabis is now mainstream. Like within all of this sort of like movement toward a more inclusive community, then you also see something that goes the exact opposite direction and wants it to be like very niche and sort of not only like gender focused, but very like heavy metal focused, which I think is kind of interesting. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see sort of like these divergent paths of beverages that we would consider to be, you know, totally mainstream and not edgy, like going off in a weird direction. Anyway, a little off topic, but I thought it was interesting, so I wanted to call it out. And since we're talking about regionality, I think it would be cool to go into our next audience participation. Is that everyone on board with that
Absolutely.
one? All right, this is a fun one too. Okay, talking about states, because we all know there's so much variation state to state in the US. During the first 10 months of 2022, which US state had the highest growth in cannabis beverage sales? Is it A, Arizona, B, Illinois, C, Colorado, or D, Michigan? And this data point comes from headset.io, and this is sales data. Feel free to take a guess.
Which U.S. state had the highest growth in cannabis beverage sales? Arizona, A, B, Illinois, C, Colorado, or D, Michigan?
I see one vote for A.
Yeah.
It's from Stacy for Arizona. Michelle is guessing D, Michigan. Let's see what else will roll in. This might be a little bit of a tricky one, but it's interesting stat.
But Stacy knows her beverages. I'm tempted maybe to roll with Stacy. Sang, any thoughts on this?
Oh, you're asking a Canadian. This one's extremely hard for me. Well, you know, we do produce our beverages just right across from Michigan. I could pretty much see Michigan when I'm there, so I would say Michigan just because, yeah, I can see it from the border. So that's the only basis. I have no other basis of making this choice.
That's like what Sarah Palin said about Russia. She could see it from Alaska.
Yeah.
All right. Well, somebody said C because I'm from Colorado. I was going to say C because Colorado starts with C. Let's let's see what the answer is.
And that was Quentin. Thank you for your guess, Quentin. And the answer is D, Michigan. Michelle, you got it right. Good job. Yeah, so during the first 10 months of 2022, Michigan's beverage sales increased 272% over the same period in 2021. We also saw a lot of growth happening in Massachusetts. Love that Massachusetts made it to this list because we're talking a lot about Massachusetts today. And then a couple of states saw a small dip in cannabis beverage sales: Colorado, Maryland, and Nevada. Interesting.
Yeah. Saying you were right. You saw Michigan coming. Well, so moving along, you know, saying you work at the Boston Beer Company, and that said, I want to gently ask you this question, right? Because you work for a company that sells alcohol beverages, and you also work for a company and develop cannabis beverages. You know, what's the economic growth potential? What is it, a zero sum game as alcohol drinkers leave alcohol and come over to cannabis, or do cannabis consumer rather do alcohol drinkers also drink? Will they also drink, and do they also drink? So you know, is there more consumption happening, or are people leaving one pool and moving into another?
Yeah, you know, this is totally my personal take on it, but I would say, you know, there is space for both. And then when you think about the alcohol industry, it's huge. It's, you know, people love beverages, you know, so I think it's not one or the other. I think there's going to, you know, alcohol is not going to go anywhere. It's, you know, a tried and true beverage form. I think there's also room for the cannabis. And this could be, you know, people who, for some, you know, for their own personal reasons, don't drink alcohol. It's giving them a choice. And, you know, you're drawing in people who don't drink alcohol, but now they have a choice to drink cannabis beverages. And hopefully, like one day like, you know, in restaurants, you can drink cannabis because, you know, you're giving people options. So one, you are drawing in new drinkers for sure. But there's also, you know, people's preferences, consumers' preferences change. And some are, you know, kind of deciding to drink less alcohol, and you do see that. And that's, you're keeping those drinkers by providing them, again, choice with cannabis beverages or a non-alc. I've been going to a lot of dinners, and it's just really interesting. People are, I had ordered a Sam Adams Gold Rush, which is a non-alc beer. And I'm like, oh, am I going to be the only one not drinking? And it turns out quite a few people drank. Either they didn't want to, drive home, they had to drive home, or they've had a stressful day or whatnot. But I think there is space for both. And I think economics wise, you're either keeping drinkers, or you're bringing in new drinkers who maybe didn't drink alcohol. There's going to be a bit of cannibalism, but you know what? Again, the alcohol industry is large. So I think more important is you're either going to bring in new drinkers who didn't drink alcohol, or you're going to keep drinkers who are going away from alcohol. So,
right. One,
I totally agree.
and one thing I think is important, and correct me if I'm wrong, Boston Beer did a program with Mountain Dew, correct?
They did, yeah.
And so
really well.
I had worked heavily on Mountain Dew back in the day when it went extreme. And so over the years, I've followed the Mountain Dew brand, and I was really surprised in a pleasant way when I saw that Mountain Dew now had an health brand. Why? Because I saw that demographic grow up, right? I saw them as pimply skateboarding boys, and then turning into 20-somethings that were gaming, and all of a sudden now we're not looking for that sweet beverage, but we're looking for an alternative to an alcoholic beverage. So that just made all the sense in the world to me. And I think that will probably start to happen too, as we see, people age within categories and how we cater to their needs.
Yeah, especially Gen Z, because we know that they are a consumer segment that really values choice, and they're not necessarily stuck in the same traditions that other generations are. And I think that they will be probably the most adaptable and flexible when it comes to choosing beverages, and they want choice, and they want to be able to experience, a wide variety of products, potentially even in the same session. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So anyone who wants to ask Seng a question, please feel free to drop your question in the chat. And I want to ask any final thoughts or predictions about the future of cannabis-infused beverages?
Yeah, I would say for sure there's going to be a tipping point. With cannabis beverages, it's difficult when, you can't advertise. And some of my friends didn't even know that cannabis beverages were available or didn't know where to purchase it. But I think, there will be a tipping point. And I could give two personal stories of, the start of this tipping point. One is a friend who texted me, and he's just like, during Frosh Week at university, our local university, they had to confiscate cannabis beverages. Now, anybody who knows, when you start, college or university, you're not of age to drink alcohol or cannabis beverages. And traditionally, they have to confiscate alcohol beverages. It's quite common. But to finally hear that, okay, they're confiscating cannabis beverages. Yes, if you're underage, please don't drink. But they're confiscating cannabis beverages. And it just goes to what you said earlier, Adriana, of that demographic, right? So that is very interesting. And then the other one would be, I had a friend come over, and normally I pull open the fridge and I gave him a beer, and he said, actually, can I have a teapot? And I was just like internally happy, like, like someone's asking for a teapot. So I think there will be a tipping point where, cannabis beverages is normalized and, more widestream, and hopefully there's consumption lounges and being able to drink in, restaurants. And I just think, yeah, we're getting close to that tipping point.
I'm curious about something. I was on a webinar last week, and one of the questions that came up was, what was the future of dispensaries, and what would a dispensary look like? And my first answer, I said I have two answers. My first answer is, it will have everything for everybody. It will, you can do self-purchases, there'll be vending machines, there'll be advisors if you need more information for products, so you could either get what you want and be on your way, or you could really take time and figure it out. My second answer was, there won't be dispensaries in the future. Cannabis will be sold just like basically alcohol and tobacco, right? You can go into convenience stores, and these new channels, if you will open up. Do you have any, and I know you're in Canada, and I know the distribution system is very different there, but do you have any thoughts on that? The future of distribution of cannabis-infused beverages? Will they be right next to the beers and malt liquors and energy drinks?
Yeah, I think, it would be amazing at one point to get there. I think it's going to be slow. Regulations are going to be cautious about it, right? To make sure that it doesn't get into the hands of, those that are underage. But I think, one day it'll be normalized. Alcohol was very restricted at one point, prohibition and stuff. And I think at one point, it's just how long will that take to get to that point of being on par with alcohol in terms of distribution. But can you know Canada is a little bit different. There are a lot of dispensaries everywhere, and there's not it's not hard to get cannabis products here. So it's very, very available.
And we do have a question that just came in from Wally, which I love, saying, does Teapot have any auxiliary emulsion tech to increase onset and peak, reduce duration, RE, metabolic pathways? Very technical question. Thanks, Wally.
Yeah, thanks, Wally. It's difficult because I do get asked that a lot, onset and peak, and it's similar to alcohol where everyone had to try it for the first time to see how it made them feel. And for me, it all depends on like how much I've eaten, how much I slept, how fast I'm drinking it. But for me personally, I would say teapot is quite fast. To me, it's like about 15 minutes. But I would say it's similar to, for me, drinking alcohol. Like, I was going to an event, I had a teapot. It would be very similar onset time to an alcoholic beverage for me. But again, it's so personalized. And it's weird because you don't really get asked that a lot in alcohol. What's the onset, the peak, duration? Because everybody kind of knows it. And I feel like we just have to get there with cannabis beverages. Everyone has to try it and figure it out for themselves. What's that peak onset? But in terms of emulsion tech, yes, it is faster than, I would say, a gummy or an edible. There is technology in teapot to make it a quicker onset.
Say, I think, and this is a deep conversation. We don't have to really go into it now for sure. But one of the things that I always see is, these types of questions always come up back, whether it's the onset or whether it's the high dosage. And I think these questions keep on reappearing because of the medical side of things. Like you said, in alcohol, nobody ever asks the question, how long is it going to take for me to feel this? Right. So I think there's both of those aspects. And I think, people who ask the onset question or the dosage questions are the ones that are probably coming more from a medical perspective. But it's interesting. But Seng, you have shared so much information with us today, and we just really appreciate what you do. How you do it, it's both technical and it's thoughtful, and you're working for one of the best companies in the industry. So we appreciate that they've also taken the step to normalize the acceptance of cannabis and to make make products that everybody can enjoy in a safe way, and that's what it's all about. So thank you for spending time with us today.
And thank you, Adriana and David, for really creating this community so we can chat about these great topics and important topics. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Well, as usual, we always have guests who just are enlightening and inform us and school us along the way. So we thank Seng. Next week, we've got a really great show. Our show is called Cannabis Design and Lifestyle. We have two guests, which are Lana Van Brunt and Haley Deneen, and they are the co-founders of Sackville. And Sackville is a New York City-based cannabis accessories company. So we're going to be talking design, accessories, cannabis, lifestyle, and how it all comes together. And we're looking forward to that.
Awesome. Yeah. And the glue that holds it all together is branding. We love it. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you for participating in our little quizzes, and thank you for your comments and questions. Have a wonderful Thirsty Thursday.
That's right. And we'll see you next week. Don't forget, cannabis is best kept secret at brandingbud.com. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.